What we're going to do tonight, we're going to be looking at the third chapter of Daniel. And in the third chapter of Daniel, we're going to look at a golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up on the plain of Dura. Now remember, I said the other evening, Daniel is pretty much 6 chapters of stories and 6 chapters of prophecy. And the stories are there to tell us how to prepare for the things that are going to happen. And that's what we're going to look at tonight as we look at the 3 worthies that are cast into the fiery furnace. If you remember the first night, we were looking in Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel had a dream there of an image. But tonight I want you to see how this other image parallels, but yet is different. So let's take our Bibles and go to the 3rd chapter of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 3, we will begin with that first verse. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof was 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Elam, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to what? What are they coming to? It's a dedication ceremony, supposedly. We're going to see that it changes quickly. To come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, captains, judges, and all these guys that we just read about, they all came and they stood before this image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. And then an herald cried aloud to you, "It is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up." Now do you see what's happened? A dedication service has now become a commanded worship service that they must worship an image that has been set up. We're going to see some great significance of this a little later tonight. He says, "And whoso falleth not down and worships shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up." See what's happened here, my friends? Everybody now, the whole world, all of the nations, people, kindreds, and tongues are now commanded that they must worship this golden image. And if you don't worship, what happens? They're going to be killed. They're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. So there's a death decree that is tied in with the worship of this image. Now in chapter 2 that we saw last week, remember? Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He saw this great image with the golden head and the arm and chest of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. What did the golden head represent? Babylon. But Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, there's going to be another kingdom after you, an inferior kingdom that's going to destroy your kingdom and take over. And then there's going to be others after it. What's Nebuchadnezzar trying to say in chapter 3 now? The gold will never pass away. My kingdom will last forever. It's not just a golden head. The whole image is gold now. And Nebuchadnezzar is in defiance of what God had told him was going to be through his prophet Daniel. So now they got the golden image in contrast to the other one. I want you to see something very significant. We looked at some of these statements last night, and we'll look at a few more during the series of some of the tablets that were found written by Nebuchadnezzar. There's a lot of archaeological discoveries from this guy. Notice what this tablet says. The fortifications of Escala and Babylon I strengthen and establish the name of my reign. For how long? Is Babylon ruling today? Nebuchadnezzar around anywhere? You know, Saddam Hussein pictured himself as another Nebuchadnezzar. The kingdom of Babylon was right there where Iraq is today. And the ancient Babylon set right down in the southern part of that country. And Hussein was trying to build all of that back up again and thought he was going to be another Nebuchadnezzar. Mine's going to last forever. But it has blown into the sands of history. The image that he built was one of a very interesting dimension. This great image, it says, was 60 cubits high. A cubit is somewhere between 18 and 21 inches long, or the distance of the elbow to the end of the finger of the ruling monarch. So you get an extra big king, it's a couple of inches longer. Taking the smaller figure of 18 inches, a foot and a half, that would make this 60 foot or 60 cubit high thing 90 feet tall. That's tall. 90 feet is very tall. But the interesting thing, it says it's only 6 cubits wide. So that makes it 9 feet wide. That's a big, tall, skinny thing, isn't it? You know, there's some skinny people in the world. I'm not one of them, if you hadn't noticed that. But I've not seen anybody quite that skinny. But people don't understand the building of images or setting things up. When you have a statue or something, what do you put it on? You ever been to a park? Pedestal. That's why I've told my church members and folk over the years, don't ever put me on a pedestal. I've been to parks and I see what the birds do to those things on pedestals. So this image was on a pedestal, just like our Statue of Liberty. Our Statue of Liberty is pretty tall. It's 305 feet tall. But the statue itself is only 111 feet tall. 2/3 of the Statue of Liberty is the base or the pedestal that it's on. And so it's the same with this image here. So that would bring this down about to the proportion of a human form. When you bring it down to putting it on a pedestal, half the size. So it's probably 45 feet high. On a pedestal, probably 45 feet high, or thereabouts. Now it's in the plain of Dura. So people coming into Babylon from all directions had to come off of the hills and the mountains down into this plain. And so for miles, they would be able to see the sun reflecting and glistening off of this enormous golden statue. And so now when it's all finished, the people are told, come, we're going to have a dedication. They get there, and once they're all gathered together, we're going to play some music. And when the music stops, if you don't bow down and worship the image, you will die. So this is the setting that we're in. Until now, absolutely nothing has been said about worship. It was a dedication. But whosoever doesn't bow down and worship this image will die. There's no alternative. Death is the only thing waiting for you. So what we have is a command governing worship, which stands in direct opposition to God's command. And so what the question is who should God's people obey? You see, does not the commandments of God say you shouldn't have any other gods before me? Doesn't the second one say you're not to make any, or the third one, not make any second one, not make any graven images or bow down to it? But now God's people are commanded to do this. Now they have to make a choice as to what they are going to do. So let's pick our story up here. Let's go to chapter 6 for a moment. I want you to see something. Like I said, the stories are something that are more than just things to tell our children. Later, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego's friend, or Daniel, the four that were together in the beginning, Daniel now is going to go through something similar to this. Look in chapter 6. We've seen now that the Medes and the Persians are ruling, and it pleased Darius, who was the Median ruler, to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was what? Daniel was the first what? Am I going deaf? I'm getting scared up here. He was the first what? President. So there's the king. Then there's these presidents, and Daniel is directly under the king and over these 3 presidents, okay? Now watch. The reason was that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. So the purpose was, watch after the king's goods. All of this great realm of Babylon, when the funds and stuff started coming in, he needed honest people up there. Well, unfortunately, out of all of them, only one was honest, and we'll see this in a minute. Watch. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes. Notice why. Because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So is Daniel one of the chief people in the kingdom? And why is it that he is? Why did Darius set him up as such? Are you with me tonight? Because of an excellent spirit. What spirit would that be? What spirit governed? I thought I heard it. I'm going to go home tonight and tell my father-in-law I want his hearing aids. What spirit was in Daniel? The spirit of the living God. Okay, now watch this. Then the presidents, the princes, sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. They're jealous. And also, they can't skim anything because Daniel's watching them. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning what? The law of his God. The law of God is the issue here again, you see. If we're going to find anything against Daniel, we've got to set it up to where the law of his God will be in contradiction to the law of the Medes and the Persians. And these guys begin to work at that. Eventually they're going to get thrown to the lions because of it, but watch what happens. It says, verse 6, Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask any petition of any god or man for 30 days, save thee, king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Was that true? Was that true? No, it wasn't. They're lying. Where was the first president? Where was the one that was over them all? You think Daniel was involved in this to get himself thrown to the lions? They were lying. They did this when Daniel was away. And I'm pretty sure they made sure that his friends weren't there either. And they said, we've all gotten together and we want to issue this. And they flattered the king, and the king signed the decree. And once he did, these guys said, oh, by the way, king, they waited 3 days, and Daniel went and prayed. And then they came back to the king and said, oh, you know, that captive Jew, Daniel, he's not regarding your law. He's still praying to his God. And immediately Darius knew what had happened. And he set to work, and you can read the story later, how to try and deliver Daniel. But we're going to go quickly through this now. They said, we won't find any occasion against him unless it's got something to do with the law of God. So they had to put Daniel and his faithfulness to God and his law at odds with the law of the land. This is going to happen again real soon, not just in this country, but around the world. Watch what verse 10 says. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees, now watch this, 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did what? He would not allow a man-made law to get in the way of his God. He was still going to be faithful. And there he did what he did all the time. Watch again. Jesus said this, in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the what? The commandments of men. When you have a man-made commandment that stands in opposition to God's commandments, and you do not keep God's commandments, what does he say your worship becomes? Vain, useless. It doesn't even do any good to pretend to worship him, because he will not accept the worship of those who willfully turn away from him to follow man-made commandments. And we'll see this a little more. So the next morning now, Darius comes to the lion's den. He rolls it back. You know, this is interesting. All night long when you read the story, King Darius is fasting and praying, and he's worried about Daniel, and he wants to get him out of there. Daniel's not the least bit worried. As soon as the first rays of sun came up, the king was there, had them roll back the stone, and he calls out and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee? How did Daniel serve God? Continually. Not on again, off again. Not, well, when I feel like it, but not when I don't feel like it. He was consistent in his relationship with God. And so the king cries out, and when he hears Daniel's voice come back, I bet he was just about ready to jump up and down. Daniel says, my God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me. And also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Daniel says, God sent the angel. While the king had been fasting and praying all night, Daniel had been having a good visit with the angel of the Lord. And the lions didn't hurt him because Daniel was faithful, he was innocent, and he didn't do anything against God or against the government. Yeah, he had to disobey the law, but he had to do that in order to be faithful to God. I'm innocent before God and you, king. And the king knew that. And so we're going to see that one day soon, and we'll study this group a little later, there's a group of people known as the 144,000. And this 144,000 will be like what Daniel was in the lion's den. It says in Revelation 14:5, in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. We have to be without fault before the throne of God if we want to go with him and cast our crowns down at that throne. If there's fault, you won't be there, friends. It goes on and says in chapter 14, verse 12, here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You see, the issue still in the last days is keeping the commandments of God. There never was and never will be a time when it is permissible to disobey God in order to obey man or even your own wants and desires. And the commandment keeping is possible only because of, what's that word? Faith. Because of the faith of Jesus, they are able to live the way Jesus wants them to. And so this is going to happen in the future. The conflict will again be between the law of the land and the law of God. We all have a choice to make. We can either worship God or we can worship the beast and his image that we're going to look at a little bit later. We'll have a choice. God never, ever takes away the freedom of choice. And he calls on his people. He says, I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose ye life, for why will ye die? And for some reason we think that the cursing and the death is better than the life and the blessing. We tend to run after it as fast as we can go. We seek the pleasures of sin for a season and throw away the joys of eternity for it. So in these last days, we're going to have to obey one or the other. To obey God will be to disobey the law of the land, or to obey the law of the land will be to disobey God. There is no middle ground. There wasn't then. There won't be when this comes around. Let's go back to Daniel again. Daniel chapter 3. Picking it up in verse 8. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now watch this. There are certain Jews, you know, those captive slaves. There's some of those Jews that thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. It was a setup, wasn't it? They were watching, because if they hadn't have been, they'd have been down with their face in the dirt like everybody else. But they were watching because they knew these guys wouldn't do it. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do ye not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? You know, Nebuchadnezzar does something here that Christians fail to do. He heard something bad about somebody. You ever had somebody say something bad about you, or you hear rumors that somebody said this or did that? And immediately we want to believe it and say, oh, that rascal. But here's a pagan king who gives an example of what Christians should do. If that happens, you call for that person and you say, I've heard this. Tell me, is it true? Get it straight from the person that's involved in this, and you'll save a lot of heartache. Don't take the word of other people. Don't take the word of those people who go around and whisper behind people's backs. And so he says, is it true? So these guys brought Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego up there. The issue on the plain of Dura was one of obedience. And as they're standing out there on that plain, they had a choice that they had to make. The choice was to be worshiping the image and breaking the commandments of God, or keeping the commandments of God and worshiping the image. I would submit to you tonight, they didn't make that choice on the plain of Dura. They made that choice long before they ever got to the plain of Dura. They made that choice before they ever got to Babylon as captives. They made that choice when Daniel and the rest of them purposed in their hearts that they would be faithful to God. I can tell you now that when that music started playing and everybody started falling on their faces, Meshach didn't look at Shadrach and say, let's stoop down and lace our sandals. We're standing up like a sore thumb. Let's kind of at least get lower. No, they stood completely as tall as they could. I imagine they probably had better posture then than at other times, because they knew they were standing for God. And when you stand for God, stand as tall and erect as you can. people need to know where we stand. And so they made their choice to be faithful to God before they ever got to the plain of Dura. Even though Peter did not say this until some 600 years later, it was still the philosophy, the very theology, let's put it that way, of these people. Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than what? That has been the position of God's people from the very beginning. We need to obey God rather than man. There's not a man alive that can save us. There's not a man alive that can raise us from the dead. You know, there's some doctors that can give us medicine to help us get well, but there's not a man alive that can heal us. God says, I am the Lord thy God that heals thee. Be faithful to God. Don't worry about man. Put your trust in the Lord and not the arm of flesh. So to obey the command of Nebuchadnezzar would have been to disobey both the first and the second commandment of God. And so in ancient Babylon, the church and the state united to promote falsehood, to force the conscience, and to coerce worship. Again, this is going to happen in the very near future. There are already groups trying to bring this about today. In Revelation 13, and in a few nights, we're going to study this 13th chapter. We're going to look at part of it in a couple of nights, and then we're going to spend a whole night just looking at this Antichrist power. But watch what it says. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. There's the image, you see. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not what? Worship the image of the beast should be what? Killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their foreheads. You see, the image is going to be set up again. And everybody is going to be commanded to worship the image. And if you don't worship the image, you're going to be put to death. It goes on and says that no man may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. We're going to spend another whole night on what that mark of the beast is. God doesn't leave us to have to guess at these kind of things, friends. The Bible is clear on all of these issues if we just let the Bible interpret itself and quit allowing man to throw their fanciful ideas and speculations into it. So the coming crisis is going to be very similar to the one at the time of Daniel and his friends. The Babylonian king, who was a powerful world leader, established a counterfeit image and compelled worship contrary to God's commandments. The issue then revolved around the authority of God's word, loyalty to Christ, and obedience to his commandments. That's always been the issue since Satan first brought Adam and Eve to sin. They chose to believe Satan. They chose to believe the serpent. They knew what God had said. As a matter of fact, Eve said, yeah, God said we shouldn't eat this stuff. And the devil says, oh, you gullible woman, you. God just holding something back. For God knows that in the day that thou eatest thereof, your eyes will be open and you'll be like him. Try it. Look at me, I've ate it. And she believed. And that's why the Bible says that the devil is a liar from the beginning and the father of lies. And we're going to look at the first lie ever told on this planet in a few nights. So this is what it's all about. Now notice the issues here. First of all, corrupt rulers, counterfeit image, a great time of trouble, worshiping. And I don't know what that thing just did to me. Church and state. Let me see if that'll go backwards. Okay, we got it all up there now. Church and state united, forced worship with a death decree, and the issue is obedience to God or to man. And it lies just ahead of us. I want to tell you tonight, friends, we could wake up tomorrow and find the mark of the beast already instituted. Everything is already in place. As a matter of fact, I hear people say all the time, well, this or this or this has got to happen before Jesus comes back. Do you know that Jesus could come back tomorrow and not have to apologize to anybody for being early? Oh, you're not supposed to be here till that happens, Lord. Go back. You're not here yet. He's not going to accept that. He says, I will cut it short in righteousness. Jesus will come when he wants to. We used to play this game, remember, all of us, I did. Hide and seek, and what we say? Ready or not, here I come. He's going to say that one of these days. Ready or not, now's the time to get ready. Let's go back to Daniel 3 and pull this together now. Daniel 3, verse 13. They brought him before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said, is it true, O Daniel? Now watch this. Verse 15. Now, if ye be ready, that at that time you hear the sound of all these musical instruments again, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God, look at that shall deliver you out of my hands? Then, you guys listen close. I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to have them strike up the band again. They're going to play the music. If you go ahead and worship my image, everything will be fine. But if you don't, you're dead men. Remember the other night? Chop you up in little pieces and make your houses dunghills kind of stuff? Well, this time, a little different. I'm going to throw you in a furnace that's 7 times hotter than any furnace has ever been, and I'm going to cook you. Now watch the response of these guys. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. You see, I've heard people who do Bible readings make these guys sound sarcastic. We're not careful to answer you. No, they said, we're not full of care. We're not worried about it. Nebuchadnezzar, we're not worried in the least little bit. And here's why they're not worried. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. Who is that God? Well, it's our God, king. We're not worried about it. Our God is able. I love that. Our God is able. There is nothing that your God is not able to do. I am God, he says. Is there anything too hard for me? Trust him. Give him a shot. Now watch this. It goes further than that. It's much deeper. But if not, in verse 18. In other words, if he doesn't deliver us, if he chooses to let us die, king. If not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you've set up. Are we willing to take that position? I know God can do it, but if he chooses not, I'm going to be faithful anyway. Because we're going to have to come to a place in our life to where we trust God enough to where we are willing to die before we would bring disrepute and dishonor upon him, before we're unfaithful. That's who the 144,000 are, and we'll see that more later. Yeah, God can take care of us, but if he chooses to let us be a martyr, and there's been millions of them, in a few nights I'm going to share with you where 150 million martyrs died at the hand of an apostate power during the Dark Ages. 150 million. I'm going to mention names that you'll know. I'm going to recommend a couple of books that you can read, but are you willing to die for what you believe in? Are you willing to die for God? You know, if we really stop and think about it, it's a lot easier to die for God than to live for him. Battle's over once you lay it down. He'll raise you back up again. But we got a battle to fight here, and a big one ahead of us. Now, this is what's going on at this point in time. So their decision had been made before they ever went to the plain of Dura. They'd already determined that no matter what happened out there, they were going to be faithful to God. So now they're facing the fiery furnace. They knew that God had already said, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. You shall not bow down yourself to them or serve them." And so they refused to do so. Let's pick it up in verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. You see, I could imagine that he was probably smiling at those guys when he said, "Come on, guys, I'll play the band again. I'll give you another chance." And when they said, his visage, his face changed. The rage was there. And he turns, he says, "Go get one of them furnaces 7 times hotter. Heat it up." And he commanded the most mighty men that were in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their hose and their hats and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. The mightiest soldiers in the army, big strong guys, the Schwarzeneggers of their day, grab these 3 guys, carry them over. They can't even get all the way up. They get close enough to where they could throw them in, but the heat is so hot, it kills the mighty soldiers right there. And these guys go flying into the furnace. Now watch what happens. This is exciting here. Watch this. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 24, the king was astonished, and rose up and spake and said to his counselors, "Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said unto the king, "True, O king." You know, he's sitting there watching the show. All of a sudden, he comes right up off of his throne. "Hey, didn't we throw 3 of them in there?" "Yes." Watch. He answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like unto the," who? "The Son of God." Boy, he couldn't stay in his throne. He saw that. Now what's he going to do? We threw 3 in there. There's 4 of them, and they're all loose. They're not even tied up anymore. They're walking around, and that 4th one looks like the Son of God. How did he know what the Son of God looked like? Any ideas? Anybody? You know, I heard a story once of a school. They were little kids in the kindergarten were drawing pictures, and teacher was going around and looking at what they were drawing. She got to Susie, and she said, "Susie, what are you drawing?" She says, "I'm drawing a picture of God." Teacher says, "But nobody knows what God looks like." Susie said, "They will when I get done." How did Nebuchadnezzar know what Jesus looked like? A couple of ways. One is Daniel was his right-hand man in that kingdom. And Daniel was constantly sharing God with Nebuchadnezzar. But the other one is, remember Peter and the disciples were with Jesus up by Mount Hermon, all the way up by Mount Hermon, and there and up in that area, if you've ever been there, there's all of these high hills, and there's ledges all over in these hills. And they used to have statues up there of all these different gods. Hundreds and hundreds of places where these pagan gods were setting. And Jesus, that's the furthest north Jesus ever went. He's there with them, and he looks at his disciples, and he says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they begin to respond. Some say you're John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and they're going on, and he stops them. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responded. Remember? Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven." That same God revealed to Nebuchadnezzar that was his son in that furnace. Now Nebuchadnezzar threw 3 in, and now there's 4, and guess what? He doesn't want that 4th one to come out of there. He goes back over and he says, "Hey, you 3 guys, the ones I threw in there, you guys come, you other one, you stay right there. I don't want you. You other 3, come on out." Watch this. Pick it up here. Verse 28. Or verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth from the midst of the fire, you see. And the princes and the captains and the kings and the counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose body the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. They didn't even smell like smoke. You know, one of my biggest problems going camping is sitting around a campfire. I'm a magnet for smoke. I could sit on this side of the campfire and that smoke will just come right at me. I'll get up and move to the other side, and that smoke will change directions. It just comes to me. I don't care where I go. I smell like smoke when I go camping. Pardon me? Is that what it is? Thank you very much. I'll remember that one when that happens to me again. She said smoke follows beauty. Don't believe everything you hear. Okay. So he had the other 3 come out. Everybody saw them. The only difference in the way they came out and the way that they went in is that they were free. They were no longer bound. It had burned the ropes off from them, but they didn't smell like smoke. They weren't singed. Their hair wasn't singed. Don't you just love the smell of singed hair? Ugh. They weren't singed or nothing when they came out of that furnace because Christ was with them there. Friends, I want you to know that no matter what kind of a fiery trial you might go through in life, Jesus has promised in Isaiah 43, when you pass through the fire, I will be with you, and the flame shall not kindle upon you, for I am the Lord your God. Remember those promises. We're going to need them someday soon. So as they came out of the fiery furnace, not even the smell of smoke was on them. Let's finish these last little bit of verses here tonight. We went to 30, but let's take it with 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Now watch this guy. That every people, nation, language would speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill. See, his dunghills are coming back again. Because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Question is, was that a good law? Everybody's got to worship the God of Daniel and his friends here. Got to worship the God of heaven because there's no other God like him. Is that a good law? Does God want forced worship? Do we want to treat God the way the Islamic peoples do Allah? Either you worship him or we kill you. Or does God want a worship of love? You see, religious laws enforced by the state are evil laws. This country has a separation of church and state. It is fast disappearing. I've been in many other countries of the world. You better be thankful. If you've never been abroad, I want to tell you tonight you live in the best place in the world to live. The land of the free. because it's the home of the brave. They do not have these religious laws yet. There's some on our books that I'll share with you in a few nights, but it's not bad yet. People talk about us being a Christian nation. So do we want to be a Christian nation? In other words, do we want to pass laws to make everybody believe like we do? And which branch of Christendom do we want to make the laws conform to? Because Christendom isn't even harmonious within their own ranks. If they were, we wouldn't have what's going on in Ireland between Catholics and Protestants. Christians killing Christians. We saw the other evening, or I referred to what happened in Rwanda and many other places. An attempt to reduce crime. If let's say that if the government, in an attempt to reduce crime, conserve energy, preserve the family, should they then declare that everyone has got to accept Jesus and close all businesses and establishments every Sunday in order to go to church and worship Him? Would that be a good law? People who haven't dealt with this would think so, because it sounds pretty good. We're going to make you worship the way we want you to worship. I've sat on committees, even evangelical committees, where they want to pass these laws, where they want to go to schools and tell them what they can and cannot do, when they can and cannot have their ball games. And many of you are too young to remember what was going on in the 70s when we had that energy crisis that we were supposed to have been over within 10 years. Closing gas stations everywhere, signs trying to get people to boycott anybody that was open on Sundays. Force them to be a Christian because God was cursing us. It's happening today, my friends. People are trying to do this type of thing. For years, religious leaders in America have been persistently working to the end of establishing and enforcing religious standards by law. Can we enforce morality by law? We can have moral standards, yes. But can we tell? You see, if we pass some of these laws, what happens to the Muslims? What happens to the Jews? What happened to people that worship on other days? What happened to people who don't want to worship God? We're going to grab them by the hair of the head and drag them to church? No, religious laws are not what's needed. What's needed is the power of the Holy Spirit in the lives of the professed Christians to show the people that there is something much better. I want you to see some statements here from just a few religious centers right now, and we'll pick these up on another evening. We have the power and the people to embark on this movement. What movement? To enforce religious laws by state mandate. Notice this one. The civil authorities should be urged to cooperate with the church in maintaining and strengthening this public worship of God. So a union of church and state to enforce religious worship and to support with their own authority. So the state now, the government is to support with their authority the regulations set down by the church's pastor. So the Bible, my friends, predicts that there is a coming confederacy of religions in America attempting to unite church and state. And I want to tell you tonight, it's being fulfilled. And I could see by the looks of many faces, you're not even aware that it's happening out there. One night here, I'm going to share some things with you that will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. These things are happening at a phenomenal rate. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. It's going to happen. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, here's the other side of it. If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or in his hand, he himself shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. It's the most awesome warning found in the Bible. And everybody's going to have to choose between one or the other. Jesus wants us to be in the kingdom of heaven with Him. That's why He came down here. And that's why He left again. To prepare a place to come back. We saw that the other evening. And what we see on that cross is the greatest revelation of love that the universe has ever seen. What Jesus was saying by the action itself was, I love you. He doesn't want us to be lost. He doesn't want us to be pulled in with this beast's power. He doesn't want us to be afraid of a death decree, because he is the one that can deliver us from death. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's what it's going to come down to, friends. And we must each decide. And so tonight, I want to leave you with this thought. Simple question. Do you love Jesus? You want to be found ready and waiting when he comes. Be faithful. Purpose in your heart to be true to him. Let us pray.